My name is Stephanie Rangel, and the article I chose to do was Nightmares, Bad Dreams, and Emotional Regulation. And this is an article by Ross Levin and Tor Nielsen. What are nightmares? Nightmares, essentially, are these vivid, emotional, dysphoric dreams that typically have negative attachment. The origins of dreams themselves have limited evidence and don't have any real set-in-stone explanation. This is in hopes of understanding the answer as to what separates types of nightmares from one another. This being whether or not the nightmare proved to be traumatic or not, or whether it woke the dreamer or not. The point of answering these inquiries they have about nightmares and the emotional dysregulations that potentially correlate is to further understand the depths and inner mechanisms of the brain. The authors Levin and Nielsen explain that there is a lack of answers revolving around the origins of dreams, specifically nightmares, and what harmonizes the different types of nightmares mentioned earlier. The point of answering these questions is to better understand the neurocognitive processes behind nightmares and what causes them. These nightmares have reflections of extreme stress or trauma-related instances attached, such as a memory. They expected to find that normative dreaming supplies a fear extinction function and a failure in emotional regulation that results in nightmares. Furthermore, finding that the two processes that are responsible for nightmares are affect load and affect distress. Affect load deals with consequences of emotional pressures when there are daily variants. Affect distress deals with a person's quality of mind when dealing with and experiencing high levels of negative emotional reactivity. Or disturbed dreaming is strongly associated with stressful events, trauma, and PTSD. They involve fear extinction functionality in relation to emotional expression during dreaming. This relates to the limbic, paralimbic, and prefrontal regions. These are the control center for emotional expression and regulation during both sleep and waking. Affect distress is proposed to liaise the relationship between distress during waking moments and nightmare incidences. Both affect load and affect distress together in people is believed to create a high susceptibility to having instances of DD. Frequent nightmares are associated with individuals who typically experience more involvement in imagination processes and absorption of psychological stimuli and emotional activation. They also appear to be more frequent in younger adults. Younger adults are around the age of 14, and rates of DD are also high in women after the age of 14 as well. It is suggested that personality style can have an effect on how these nightmares manifest themselves in different kinds of people. Levin and Nielsen have been doing work that primarily has been supportive of a neurocognitive model. Now, this is the model that they are sort of focusing the whole article on and bringing back all of their points to sort of fit and support this model. So this model has two parts, a neurophysiological branch as well as a cognitive branch. The neurophysiological aspect is known as AMPHAC, AMPHAC, which is an acronym for the centers of the brain which it involves. These are the amygdala, medial prefrontal cortex, hippocampus, and anterior cingulate cortex. The cognitive branch is known as AND, which stands for Affect Network Dysfunction. These two branches explain the concepts in a neurological way as well as a cognitive way. The neurological aspect covers the emotional expression and representation through the limbic and forebrain regions. The cognitive side accounts for the processes behind turning fear memories into imagery seen in dreams and nightmares. when these processes are disrupted, features of nightmares are more prevalent. The AMFAC/AND model showed strengths and was supported by the current literature at the time. All the findings proved to be consistent with what was out there relating to cognitive neuroscience, sleep physiology, and fear conditioning. These models united the waking and sleeping processes, which allowed for further empirical investigation. The fear memory extinction function proves to be very important in the overall process of disturbed dreaming production. It is believed that dysfunction that occurs here is enough to produce these negative imagery types of visions that people tend to see. Dreaming is also said to have this characteristic to have fear memory extinction. These are the three main processes that coexist to create the dream sequence we are familiar with. The first being memory element activation. This is accounting for the ability to break down memories into single elements. Once asleep, there is much more availability to certain memories. Memory element recombination, which is the second process, deals more so with the combining of these memory elements to form a sequence. This sequence is the typical dream sequence one thinks of while dreaming occurs. Emotional expression is going to be the last of these processes, and emotional regulation is very important to fear extinction, which involves the most neural activity, typically in the limbic system. Now, emotional regulation is what allows for this regulation of negative emotions that can be aroused during a typical nightmare. And there's a high emphasis on affect load, as it is presumed to be the main player of disturbed dreaming incidences. Towards the end of the article, it was very evident that there is still much more research that is needed to have a better grasp at the information that is at hand. They explained that their findings should not be looked at as the answer or the sole reason for the production of nightmares and what causes them. These are all very big questions that have stumped scientists for a very long time and continue to do so. Before I begin to talk more about my critique, I want to state that the deeper that I looked into this article, the more I realized I potentially made a mistake. So I switched articles last minute because I was worried that the article that I had was not what you were looking for. So this time I decided to look up an article using the GMU library to refine my search so that I could just be less worried about the whole thing. And then once I began my work, I noticed that the methods section was not really talked about or really explained in this article, which also leads to my critique. There is plenty information on the subject itself, and a lot of claims of supporting evidence, but their work is not discussed in the detail that I was looking for. There was no specifics as to what their work really involved and how they came to their conclusions. No specifics on who was involved in the studies they were conducting to obtain the empirical information being talked about in the article. And once starting the work, I realized the lack of information. And I wondered if this was because I made a mistake on the type of article that I chose and realized there was a lot of information missing. So for that, I do apologize. In the empirical evidence section of the article, there is simply just a lot of referencing and a lot of statements like neuroscience literature are consistent with these formulations. And then the formulations spoken about are the references that they are making to other studies. There is no talk about any specific experiments that they performed.